Welcome to The Explainer. So if you're anything like, well, most of us today, you probably obsess over getting that perfect, unbroken 8 hours of sleep, right? We track it with our smartwatches, we stress about it before our heads even hit the pillow, and honestly, we feel like we've completely failed if we wake up in the middle of the night. But what if I told you that our modern obsession with this flawless 8-hour block is actually a total historical anomaly? Today, we're unpacking the wild history of human sleep, and the truth is absolutely going to change how you look at a restless night.
Okay, let's dive into this. Is waking up at 3 a.m. really a sleep disorder, or, hear me out, is it just history calling? We tend to panic when our eyes snap open in the pitch dark, instantly doing that mental math of how exhausted we're going to be the next day. We think our sleep hygiene is totally wrecked, like something is biologically wrong with us. But I want to propose an idea that might just cure that deep-seated sleep anxiety. Our ancestors, they viewed middle-of-the-night waking as completely 100% normal. It wasn't a disorder. It was just, a regular Tuesday night.
To really wrap our heads around how we got to this point of midnight panic, we have to look at what we've been conditioned to expect. One uninterrupted 7 to 9 hour block. This solid chunk of unconsciousness that we're all chasing, it's actually a super recent expectation. It is absolutely not some eternal human truth programmed into our DNA since the dawn of time. In fact, for the vast majority of human history, the way we sleep today would have seemed incredibly strange, highly unnatural, and honestly, surprisingly lonely.
Just think about the modern bedroom for a second. It's incredibly private, the mattress is perfectly flat, and it's beautifully climate-controlled to the exact degree you want. Now, compare that to ancient realities. Ancient sleep wasn't exactly a luxurious spa retreat. Homes were often terribly smoky from indoor fires used for warmth and cooking. Rooms could be freezing cold in the winter, suffocatingly hot in the summer, incredibly crowded, and incredibly noisy. And the pests? Oh man, insects, rodents, parasites, they were a constant, everyday nuisance. You couldn't just casually jump into bed. Mattresses literally needed regular airing out just to prevent bugs from totally taking over the joint. So our plush, isolated modern sanctuaries, that's a total luxury our ancestors couldn't even fathom.
Now, what's really interesting about this is the sheer physical discomfort and the wild variety of historical bedding. Early humans were most likely sleeping on simple layers of grass, leaves, animal skins, or just woven mats thrown directly on the dirt. Then you've got the ancient Egyptians. They used raised wooden beds, but instead of plush pillows, they used headrests made of wood, stone, or even ivory. I mean, just imagine trying to get comfortable, tossing and turning with your head resting on a literal block of carved stone? No way! Meanwhile, the Greeks and Romans were a little softer, stuffing simple mattresses with wool, straw, reeds, or feathers. But for ordinary people across the globe, you simply slept on mats or pallets laid right on the hard floor.
And here's another assumption we really need to toss out. Lying perfectly flat. Because historically, not everyone slept lying flat. Many cultures utilize those elevated headrests or distinctly reclined positions. Some groups slept suspended in hammocks, swaying up above the ground. Others slept sitting completely upright or semi-reclined. This was especially common for folks who were traveling through dangerous areas or, for those who had the night shift guarding herds of animals. Comfort was completely secondary. It was all about practicality, security, and surviving the harsh environment they were navigating.
Which brings us to a major shift in how we view privacy. This whole concept of communal sleep. The private bedroom as we know it is practically an illusion of the modern era. Historically, private bedrooms were a super rare luxury reserved for absolute royalty. For everyone else, sleeping was a shared communal activity. The idea of having a quiet, dark room all to yourself to drift off in perfect silence, that was simply not the historical norm. Sleep was inherently a group activity. It was driven by a need for warmth, a serious lack of space, and a very real safety in numbers approach to surviving the dark.
So who exactly was sharing a bed? Well, pretty much everyone. Families commonly slept in the exact same room, often huddled together for body heat. Kids frequently shared beds with their siblings or their parents. Servants and soldiers slept in communal spaces right alongside one another. But here's my absolute favorite detail. If you were traveling and staying at an inn, strangers sometimes shared beds. Imagine that today. You check into a roadside tavern after a long, exhausting day of travel on horseback, and you have to physically bunk up with a complete stranger because that was just the reality of historical accommodations. Personal space? Yeah, that just did not exist.
Now, let's transition to what I think is the most shocking revelation of all, the temporal reality of how our ancestors actually structured their night. This is a fascinating concept known as segmented sleep. Before widespread artificial lighting illuminated our cities and homes, historians have found deep, undeniable evidence that many Europeans managed their nighttime hours in a completely different way.
They didn't just close their eyes, cross their fingers, and hope to wake up 8 hours later. Not at all. Their night was distinctly and deliberately divided into parts.
Here's exactly how this step-by-step historical nighttime routine worked. Step 1 was the first sleep. People would typically go to bed shortly after sunset, mostly because candles were crazy expensive, and they'd sleep for about 3 to 5 hours. Then came Step 2, what was called the waking hour. Around midnight, people would naturally wake up for an hour or two. And they didn't just lie there staring at the ceiling plagued by anxiety like we do. They used this time actively. They prayed, they talked with their bedmates, they read if they had access to light, they tended the indoor fires, or, get this, they even walked out and visited their neighbors in the pitch black. After this lively midnight intermission, they moved to Step 3. They returned to bed for a second sleep, resting peacefully until sunrise.
And this brilliantly illustrates just how common this practice was. Historian Roger Ikirch documented hundreds of references to this exact pattern in diaries, court records, and literature. We're not talking about some fringe behavior practiced by a few eccentric people in a remote village. From official, historical court documents to casual, everyday diary entries and classic literature, this two-part segmented sleep schedule was heavily recorded. It was simply the standard, unquestioned way of life for centuries.
So why did this entirely disappear? Well, it all comes down to light. Without electric lighting, daily rhythms were strictly tied to natural light, specifically the sun going up and the sun going down. People generally slept much more in the winter when nights were long and far less in the summer. Sure, candlelight and oil lamps existed, but they were incredibly expensive and really quite dim. But with the invention of widespread electric lighting and the super rigid schedules demanded by industrial-era work clocks, daily life permanently changed. Artificial light allowed us to push back bedtime, essentially forcing us to cram all our rest into one single uninterrupted session before the morning factory whistle blew.
So, the crucial point is really this number, 7 to 9 hours. Ancient and medieval people did not consider sleeping straight through the night to be normal, at all. The modern expectation of one uninterrupted block of 7 to 9 hours appears to have become common only after widespread artificial lighting and the massive societal shift of the Industrial Revolution. It's an invention of modern work schedules and corporate efficiency. It is definitely not a mandatory biological setting that you are somehow failing at.
Which leaves us with this final, provocative question. Next time you wake up at 2 a.m., will you stress out, or will you embrace your ancestors' waking hour? It really changes how you look at a restless night in a dark room, doesn't it? Knowing that this is exactly how humans lived, socialized, and slept for centuries might be exactly the perspective you need to relieve that modern sleep anxiety. So the next time you find yourself staring at the ceiling at 3 a.m., remember, you aren't broken. Actually, you're just incredibly historical. Thanks for joining me on this explainer, and hey, I hope this helps you rest a little easier tonight.